Good morning, everybody. We're so happy that you could join us today. I know there's a lot of great programming here at South by Southwest, and so we're very appreciative of you joining us today for this great conversation on all things health and aging and ways we can optimize our environment to create better lives for everybody living within cities. I'm joined by a great panel today. I'm going to introduce them in 1 second. I want to set the context a little bit for our discussion today and provide a little bit of a backdrop. I'm Raj Ahuja, by the way. I'm going to moderate today. I work for an organization called the Milken Institute. We are a global think tank that develops strategies on financial, physical, mental, and environmental health. And within the Institute, I work in our Center for the Future of Aging, which helps older adults live healthier, more productive, and purposeful lives. As way of your background for this conversation, I'd like to start by just saying increased longevity is one of the greatest achievements of our modern public health and medical systems. Advancements in nutrition, hygiene, antibiotics, vaccines have nearly doubled our life expectancy over the last century. But with this great achievement comes several challenges associated with population aging as well. Aging societies require more financial, health, public services, and aging is the biggest risk factor for many diseases like Alzheimer's, certain cancers, cardiovascular disease. And so, when we look at aging, we're really looking at things from a life course perspective. And we're living in an interesting time right now. The fastest growing segment of our population are those over 65. And centenarians themselves are reaching that fast-growing aging population also. And so, I think it's an important time to have this conversation. But as we're living longer and enjoying, longer life expectancies, we're not necessarily living healthier lives. Life expectancy is rising, but those added years that we're getting are often lived in poorer and poorer health. Alarming rates of maternal and infant mortality, rising rates of certain cancers, mental health issues, type 2 diabetes, obesity are all becoming more prevalent, and the shocking part of it is it's becoming more prevalent at younger and younger ages. So these complex factors associated with healthy aging require us to take a deeper look into how we optimize our environment to promote healthy behaviors. Increasing life expectancy is very complex. Genetics only accounts for about 25% of life expectancy, and it's really our lifestyle choices, environmental factors that contribute significantly, and urges us to take a comprehensive approach to how we optimize the environment that we live in to advance healthy longevity and live better lives. And cities are the center point for all of these factors that influence our health. According to the World Bank, nearly 70% of the world's population will live in cities by 2050. And in the US, 8 in 10 older adults already live in urban environments. So, cities are this great platform, this great laboratory for financial, health, social services to all interact to promote longevity. So I'll just conclude these opening remarks by saying this demographic shift we're seeing around the world, along with climate change, is the story of our lives. It'll be the story of our children's lives. And those countries, societies, cities that prioritize longer lifespans, healthier lifespans, will enjoy profound economic, health, and even business advantages over others that don't. So that brings us to the question of the day. Can the cities, can the environment that we live in support the growing demand for services that we will require? And can the cities that we live in play a role in extending our lives, helping us live healthy lives? And for that, we have a great group of global thought leaders to answer this question. I'm going to quickly introduce each of them I'd like to say that we're going to open up to questions. We want to engage with, things that you're thinking on the ideas that the panel brings up. So we'll save about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So please, as everyone's speaking, please, organize your questions. But I'm going to start on the end over there with Mark Friedman. Mark is the co-CEO and founder of an organization called Cogenerate, which is formerly Encore.org. Mark is the author of several books, his most recent being How to Live Forever, The Enduring Power of Connecting the Generations. Mark originated a very unique idea on Encore careers, which links our second acts to the greater good of society. Mark also co-founded an organization called Experience Corps, the Purpose Prize, and Encore Fellowships. In the middle is Dr. Upali Nanda. Upali is the Executive Vice President and Global Director for Innovation at HKS, which is an international architecture firm where she focuses on designing the built environment for more meaningful impact. Upali teaches architecture and urban planning at the University of Michigan and serves on the board of the Academy of Neuroscience for Architecture. Upali was recently honored as one of 100 women who changed architecture for her research on designing spaces that promote healthy behaviors. And to my left, Dan Buettner Jr. Dan is the Executive Vice President and Chief Development Officer of the Blue Zones. As the Blue Zones project expert, Dan works with communities to bring the benefits of a Blue Zones program to all people within cities. Many of you know Dan's father recently released a new series on Netflix called Live to 100, Secrets of the Blue Zones, which is a remarkable look into the impact of our environment and core principles of healthy longevity and aging well. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being here. And I want to start off, I think we all have different conceptions of what longevity is, what it means to us. So for each of the panelists up here, I want to ask how they define longevity within the scope of their area of expertise. So Mark, I'm going to start with you. Your work focuses on fostering intergenerational connections to create thriving communities. So within your area, you talk a lot about meaningful interactions between different age groups. Can you talk a little bit about what longevity means within your area and why that is so essential nowadays?
Well, I think I'll start out with a provocative comment, which is that the real fountain of youth, that real source of longevity, is the fountain with youth. And it comes from connecting to other generations. There was a book came out last year, The Good Life, by Robert Waldinger at Harvard Medical School. That's a distillation of the 85-year Harvard study of adult development, and it found that older people who connected with, mentored, supported, collaborated with younger people were 3 times as likely to be happy as those who failed to do so. Which brings me to a thought that popped up as you were talking about the demographic shift as one of the 2 big stories of our time. But I think there's a question about what that story is. Partly it's a story of longer lives. It's also a story of the growing population of older people. But I think at root it's a story of age diversity. Having people living through these longer lives means you have a lot of people living it. At the Stanford Center for Longevity just came out with a study which showed that in 1900, if you looked at birth to 75, it was a straight downward line from 0 to 75. The findings for 2023 are a flat line. We have the same number of people who are 57 and 11, 32, 71, and I think most significantly, a quarter of the population is under 20 and a quarter of the population is over 60. We hear a lot about midlife, but I don't think the story of our time is midlife. It's a story of the old and the young. And it's also a story about a mismatch between this remarkable historic age diversity and equally remarkable and unprecedented age segregation. And age diversity and age segregation don't go together. They lead to isolation, polarization, missed opportunities. And so for me, longevity is closely connected to the configuration that we're already in, this multi-generational society that's already washing over us.
Thanks, Mark. I love the concept of we're, living in an era where, let's not talk about midlife. We have a growing older population, growing younger population, and the power of connecting them not only creates better health, but also creates the meaning within these new cities coming up that we want to, try and foster. So I want to get back to, this idea of intergenerational relationships, how to develop them, what cities can do to foster them a little bit more. But Dan, I want to turn to you next. The Blue Zones concept is really well known in terms of creating an environment that provides the nudges, unconscious nudges that we need to adopt healthy behaviors. I know on my own, if I have to go to the gym and do all the healthy behaviors and eat well, that lasts maybe Monday to Friday, more like Monday to Thursday. When the weekend starts, I'm out there binging on everything. And so I need the city around me to provide the nudges for healthy behaviors 7 days a week. Can you talk about some of the concepts and key principles within Blue Zone programs and the types of collaborations you're seeking for, while also answering the same question, what longevity means within your area?
Yeah, thanks, Raj. I'd like to know more about the binging part of what you've been up to. I missed out on that this weekend at South by. But I'll tell you this about the Blue Zones. You're absolutely right about going to the gym. Gym is not sustainable. That's one of the central messages from the studying of the world's longest lived populations. And it's this: individual discipline is a muscle, and muscles always fatigue. They always fatigue. So after a long day of South by Southwest, running around, getting your steps in, you're going to go home, and the sweet and salty items in your cabinetry are going to be calling your name. So unless you're Tom Brady or Taylor Swift and you have a private vegan chef, individual discipline is not sustainable. It's going to give you short-term wins, like going to the gym, but then long-term failures when you inevitably binge for a couple weeks and fall off the bandwagon. What the Blue Zones have is not better discipline around health and wellness and connection and purpose. In fact, a lot of them are much lazier than the average go-getter American. What they have is they live in cities. They live in environments, and they're part of cultures where it's inevitable to walk, to connect, to stay connected with others, to discover and practice your purpose, your gift that you give back to your community, to eat smart. And so the model that we partner with American cities on here at Blue Zones LLC is to mimic the epidemiological, anthropological lessons of the Blue Zones, which, if you want to change somebody's life, take the onus off that somebody and put it on their life radius. Take inventory of the choice architecture for them and make those design tweaks and those cultural programmatic tweaks so that the healthier choices are the default choices. You do that, you'll get much more sustained and much more mega transformation in a lot of things that go beyond pop health, which I'm sure we'll talk about. So when it comes to longevity, couldn't ask for a better panel to be up here with, because it really is about the environment that you're part of and the people that you live in that environment with.
Thanks, Dan. I think, when we'll talk about some of the specific levers, being pulled in Blue Zones, and, they're not expensive interventions. They're not, major overhauls of the healthcare system or finance system. They're fairly implementable interventions that we can look for near term. So we'll get into that. Upali, Your expertise lies in the role of environment and urban design in promoting healthy aging. So as the architect in the group, the innovator in the group, talk a little bit about what longevity means within your field of expertise in terms of building the environment that we're all in.
Thank you, Raj. I think, can you guys hear me? I think Danny did an incredible job of making the entire proof case for our profession. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Let's do a quick exercise. I want you to close your eyes for just a second. Just close your eyes for a second and imagine a city. Think of the image that comes to your head. Okay. Now I want you to imagine a place to live and a place to flourish. Now raise your hand if those two images were exactly the same. Gives me some hope. But look around the room. 3 hands went up. 3 hands went up when we asked the question about, is your image of a city the same as the image of a place to live and flourish? So somewhere along the line, how we have designed and lived in cities has changed. And I think that is why this panel is so fascinating today, is what happened, what created that gap, because cities, by definition, are human settlements of notable size, however we define notable. And if we define notable based on their purpose and their impact, not just size, then it changes our definition of what a city is. So then if we come back to longevity, and we say longevity is not a life lived long quantitatively, but a life lived well qualitatively, then the very purpose of cities changes. When we were having our conversations before the panel, Dan said something that was very compelling, that in the end, the 2 most powerful things in your life are where you live and who you live with. And we are putting way too much of the onus on the individual and not enough on where we live to make the life of that individual easier. So to your point, Raj, I think it's a design challenge. I think it's an environment design challenge. And I think it's looking at design as a continuum that goes all the way from policy and planning to built environment to information design and culture design, and not try to divide it into these silos that have not served us well. Because nobody wakes up in the morning and says, I really don't want to make the world a better place today. Like everyone wakes up with wanting to do something good. And yet we don't have an outcome that's getting us there. And I think that's because we have created these silos in how we approach design that are false. And that image of a city versus the image of a place to live and thrive should be coincident. And maybe that's the outcome we can get to.
Thank you. And this is the time to be having this conversation, right? We're living in a unique period of time where new cities are being built from scratch around the world. The Economist just came out with an article that said that 91 cities are being planned within the past, or announced to be planned within the past decade. 15 new cities within the past year. So, there's cities being built in Saudi Arabia, a new city called Neom, a $500 billion project in the desert that, is a combination of the real-life metaverse and, this whole new idea of urban planning with, things we can't think of in terms of transportation and tracking healthcare. And on the other side, there's existing cities like the new Singapore, which is named the 6th Blue Zone by the Buettner family over here. And so they're looking at man-made, engineered environments, with using policy levers and tax incentives to promote healthy aging within cities. And so I think as new cities are being built, as old cities are being retrofitted, for the new environment that we're in, it's really important to place longevity, really important to place meaning within those cities. And so I'm so happy that, the narrative of this conversation is really, how do we build the environment with Upali? How do we nudge people towards healthy behaviors with Dan? And then how do we fill those cities with meaning and engagement with Mark? And so I want to go back to you, Upali, and just talk a little bit more in detail about what the key design considerations are that you work on when you do urban planning that can enhance accessibility and usability of public spaces for younger and aging populations.
I love how small that question is, Raj. Well, that's easy. I think, first of all, realizing that planners have a really tough job because they have to negotiate between policy directives and existing zoning laws, which are very antiquated. They have to deal with the infrastructure engineers and where that funding and investment is coming from. And they have to think about the community that they're actually designing for, right? So, very simple thing that we don't seem to be able to get to very easily is flexible zoning. Single-use zoning isn't getting us to where we need to, and that's at the planning policy level, right? Then you start looking at prioritization, and if we prioritize two things, infill housing at different scales and mobility, those two levers alone would make a huge difference in what we are trying to do. Then let's talk about the actual design of the environments of the neighborhoods to make the healthy choice the easy choice. And that's about where do I go to walk and why do I walk? And one thing that we as a community have to realize is that for the very first time in millennia, we are living between two ecosystems. There's a digital ecosystem and there's a natural ecosystem. And they haven't figured out their synergies yet. 100 years ago, you wouldn't have a community that you had never met in person. Today you do. 100 years ago, you wouldn't have a complete smart infrastructure where you know so much about so many people and yet you wouldn't recognize each other by face. So there's a very interesting dichotomy of our times, which comes down to how we design, which is when digital ecosystems and physical ecosystems and natural ecosystems get defined independently, we are already walking down a dangerous trajectory. So I think that's the other thing that we're really trying to do is don't start making drawings without understanding the natural ecosystem and the digital ecosystem. And you have to do those both together. So I think that's been a shift. The very simple things about making the healthy choice the easy choice, we use a framework called point of decision design. At the point of decision, and identify what your point of decision is, how do you make the healthy choice the default choice? At the point of decision, what makes it easier for me to walk or bike or take a bus than get in my car? At the point of decision, what makes it easier for me to get an apple than the Snickers bar? If you look at your day, if you just started clocking your day-to-day from this point till the end of the day, and you notice things about how you walk, how you eat, what you decide to do, tell me at the end of the day how many of those decisions were healthy and if the environment actually gave you a fair choice. Because we don't give a fair choice about the healthy decision right now. So I think that is very much a design prerogative, and it's about how you lay out your neighborhoods, how you design your homes, how you make things like air quality, water quality, daylight, very, very fundamental, non-negotiable things, and then access to physical activity. Like, how can we talk about smart cities when we don't have sidewalks? Like, how do you reconcile those two things? But we're doing it right now. So the promise of Neom or Brasilia or these amazing cities is because there's so much broken in our immediate neighborhood that it's appealing for us to see a promise of this new land. And I think the true design opportunity for us as a community is to really work with the urban infrastructures we have today to bake in both physical health, mental health, and brain health as directives. And for all of them, the environment actively helps or actively hinders, but we don't ask the environment to do more. And I think that's the challenge, that if you ask me one thing that I would love to change, I would love to throw away the design briefs we have right now. because we're not asking enough of the environment. We want to ask the environment to say, how are you going to design this city, this neighborhood, this home, this workplace, this school for the healthy outcome to be the outcome of the built environment? That's an accountability that we don't have. And I think when you talk about what are we designing, we have to start designing for those outcomes and get accountable to those outcomes through our strategies right now. And that's a huge shift.
Thank you. I think, cities are starting to acknowledge, this idea of making the healthy choice easier. Cities are starting to create the concept of 15-minute cities where everything you need is within 15 minutes walkable. So that requires, sidewalks. It requires public transportation. It requires tree covering over sidewalks so that if you're in a, hot weather environment, it's easy for you to walk, within the 15 minutes to get to your location. But all of that seems so far into the future. Right now, I feel like, and we're all in this space, we kind of suck at longevity, Dan. We are actually seeing decreases in life expectancy. We have no real common thread for public policy to improve how we add meaning to our lives. All of our unconscious choices within the environment are not geared towards putting us in front of the apple that we need every day to keep the doctor away. So I think we suck at longevity right now. Dan, what do you think?
Well, in your opening remarks, you did point out that in the last half century, longevity has doubled around the world, right? That's true. And for the people in this room, we have the longest life expectancy of any other time in our species history. That said, for the second first that's in this room is that our kids and grandkids for the first time ever have a shorter life expectancy than we do. So, as George Carlin once said, it's not just about adding more years to your life, but also adding more life to those years. And in America, yeah, we have longer life expectancy, but we also spend $4 trillion a year for that life expectancy, 20% of our GDP, which is, of course, driving up taxes and generational debt, and yet we're chubbier, sicker, and more pissed off than our peer nations. So it's not really working, and here's my piggyback on Upali. She's absolutely right. We all know, and even our esteemed politicians at the municipal, regional, and federal level know smart design and that there exist experts. But it takes more than just wisdom to make the healthy choice the easy choice. It requires courage. It requires real courage to say, we are going to look past election cycles. We're going to look past quarterly earnings. And we are going to make these long-term, micro-long-term, 5, 10-year time horizon investments that are going to have huge yield, whether it's medical costs, savings, or population health, or equity, or workforce, or economic development, or property taxes. So, part of the mission here is continuing to advance the evidence base around design and programmatic efforts, but also contextualizing it within incentives for private sector, healthcare, and government that they can experience an ROI. So you're shifting the incentives, which of course you show me the incentives and I'll show you the future. I don't know if that answered your question, but I really wanted to respond to you, Upali.
No, I think that kind of conflict between private interest and capitalism and, everywhere you go, you have, tremendous access to sodas and chips, but if I want to go and buy some blackberries and strawberries at the grocery store, I just can't afford it anymore. And so I think there's some opportunity at a policy level to reorient our incentives to help promote some of the decisions that we make. Mark, I want to go to you. I think we're in love with the concept of longevity. We put trillions and trillions of dollars into trying to find a cure to live longer. You know, every article nowadays is living to 120. Can we get to 200? You know, what are the opportunities in developing pills to, you know, live forever? You know, that's a big thing that we're talking about. But, you know, as we fall more and more in love with this modern concept of longevity, you know, is that the conversation we need to be having? Or is it focusing on being happy with being 80 but living meaningful lives? And kind of how do we, you know, how do we take into account those different positions?
Yeah, well, I think we've been suffering from a false model of human thriving and human nature in the way we've been thinking about these issues. You know, before I threw out that catchphrase about the real fountain of youth, I think that our goal shouldn't be trying to live forever, or even to 120 literally. It should be the same goal that human beings have always had, which is to live on through investing in future generations. There's a Greek proverb, society grows great when older people plant trees under whose shade they shall never sit. And I think that's a much better beacon than the idea of you know, perpetuity. But I want to go back. You know, this topic is on longevity cities, and Raj, you were talking earlier about all the new cities that are being created around the world now, and we've been focusing on the future. I just want to drop back to the past for a second. We invented longevity cities in this country. Sun City opened on January 1st, 1960, outside of Phoenix, and 100,000 people showed up on the first day. It was a traffic jam for 22 and a half miles, and a time when society was completely rejecting older people and obsessed with youth. Here was a place where you could go and pretend that you were young again. Del Webb, who opened Sun City, invented the phrase the golden years, and if everybody was old, nobody was old. And that was in 1960. We did a census 2 years ago. Does anybody here know what the fastest growing city in America was? Any guesses? Yeah. I'm sure Austin was up there, but not even close. It was the Villages in Florida, by far. So the longevity city that's growing by leaps and bounds is this model that I think met certain needs, right? These weren't a nefarious plot. They were designed to meet the need of community for older people, the need of identity in a society where they were so rejected, but it's not the need that we're going to have in the future, and it's not the need that goes with planting trees under whose shade you will never sit. So I think we need a vision of these longevity cities that fits with what we know about human thriving.
And
Mark, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to add to that, because that's such a great example, and you also see all of these senior living villages that are coming up, and the villages in Florida are a great example of that. At the same time that you're looking at intergenerational living, which is a culture shift, and you're looking at these growth patterns that are not sustained, and the big climate stresses that we really don't want to face up to right now, but a lot of the places where the senior villages have come up are also very vulnerable from a climate standpoint. So it's a really interesting, perfect storm about what's happening in the digital world, what's happening in our natural ecosystems, and what people desire, and where they're moving. And to your point, when this big silver tsunami hits, and when migration patterns start changing with the snowbirds, economies get affected. There are huge economies that come up, economies that shift, economies that change. And I think, to your point, Raj, really looking at it not just at a city level, but at a national and state level, is something that we haven't done before. on what does it mean when people start moving, because we can. We really can. We can move where we want. We are looking at more years that we can actually enjoy life. I loved in the Blue Zones this concept that was shared that in Japan there is no word for retirement. But we have one. And we are looking to just finish out our last years and get to those golden years, right? The purpose of those years and how we are going to purposefully contribute to society and economy in those years is where the biggest opportunity lies. And I think we haven't even begun to unpack that, like some of our conversations about universities becoming a place of thriving for older adults, for living not just one life, but multiple lives maybe, based on what's your maximum use, and how do cities become this agile, super flexible framework for you to live to your maximum potential. And I think that's something that is very different from 1960 to what you can do now with the kind of ecosystems that have opened out to you. So I love the door you opened with that, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Raj.
No, that's great. Mark, I just want to ask you, you talk a lot about age segregation. I think there's a major negative outcome from, all these movements towards the villages and, building separate housing and placing older adults in these environments and younger adults in these environments. Can you talk a little bit about some successful initiatives that you've seen recently that kind of bring generations together, that you're excited about?
Sure, and I'll pick up on something Danny was talking about earlier. It very much squares with the Blue Zone's ethos. So I went, and Polly just mentioned university. So I went to this place at Arizona State called Mirabella. It's a senior housing community that was opened on the campus when they broke ground. Michael Crow, the innovative president of ASU, said it was going to be the coolest dorm in the world. So it opens in the middle of the pandemic, and not great timing, but people move in. If you move into Mirabella, you get full access to ASU. You can take any course. Then the pandemic recedes, and Shady Park, the preeminent electronic music club in Tempe, restarts directly across the street from Mirabella. And the music wars break out. Lawsuits are flying across East University Avenue. Can't you turn your goddamn music down? Typical, older, younger generational war. They finally resolved that, and there's a settlement. But what didn't get written about in the Wall Street Journal or the Chronicle of Higher Ed like this music war did is that Mirabella created a whole hall within this facility, which is half music-loving older people and half grad students in music at ASU, all young musicians of color. And this musical utopia broke out. And one of the most powerful stories that I ran into is this Korean-Canadian 24-year-old pianist named Michelle Kim, who gave up the flute when she decided to focus on the piano, and a 8-year-old white lawyer from New York, Emily Ziegler, who gave up the flute when she went to law school. They took up the flute together and started playing duets. And it made me think that, it's not just enough to have proximity, to have people of different generations running into each other. It's critically important and the starting point, but you also need shared purpose. In this case, music, this love of music, but the Maslowian apex of all of this is practice, doing things together. And I think proximity, purpose, and practice, are kind of, I just turned 66 and my memory is beginning to fade, so any alliteration works. But I think that's the key as we think about reimagining these cities and arrangements.
Thank you. A little anecdote from talking to Mark yesterday. His son plays the upright bass. How old is he? 16 years old. He's gotten into the jazz world all over the country, and he was saying that the biggest badge of honor among kids in the jazz world is how old your mentor is. You know, those aging jazz musicians are as close to what he called the truth of playing in the 60s and 70s and the soul of jazz, and being closer to that truth is cool for younger musicians, which I thought was great. So I want to create a little bit of an argument up on stage. I want to talk about new and old. Upali, I want you to take the new position. Dan, I want you to take the old position.
I'm not arguing with Dan.
You're going down. You're going down, you Polly. I'm not
So-
coming for you.
Like I mentioned, we're living in a unique time where cities are being built from scratch, right? Do we need to wave the white flag in American cities and say we need to start from scratch? There's some initiatives in California, you know, with some of the big VC guys buying up plots of land under a banner of California Forever that nobody quite knows what's going on. But do we need to start from scratch and build new urban environments with longevity at its core, Upali? Or, Dan, do we take existing cities and retrofit them and create the environment within existing infrastructures to promote healthy aging and longevity?
And you want us to take one of those
And
positions.
I want you guys to duke it out.
All right, we'll duke it out. I do feel that the biggest opportunity, if we were to start from scratch, is in the idea of a prototype. That sometimes there are too many things you have to fix, and doing it incrementally takes so much time and so much effort, and there is a prioritization that becomes very, very different and very difficult to really get money behind. So a prototype city offers you the opportunity to say, if all of these historical constraints were not in place, how would we do it right? And if you get a prototype, then you can take the elements of the prototype and then start putting them into cities that exist, into infrastructures that exist, and start scaling it that way. So that's the promise. The promise of the new cities is let's create prototypes. Let's create a range of prototypes, different climate conditions, different socioeconomic conditions. The fundamental thing to remember about a city is that it's never from scratch. It's always on this planet, and it's always for people on this planet, right? Those two are absolute realities. You're always designing for a certain community, hopefully with that certain community. And you have a geographical, climatic context that you have to be aware of. But given that, we have this incredible opportunity to create prototypes all across the country to say with different levels of constraints, there are different levers we could pull to get it right. And once we get that solution, we can then scale to cities that are already entrenched with different constraints and try it out. So that's my argument for why we should have investment in new cities.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Of course, we could both argue both sides all day long, and I will start with the concession to you, Polly, that we should absolutely continue to show demonstrations and role models and experimentation that can be brought back into where the people actually are, which is where I'm going to start my argument, is the Americans and the people around the world, they're already in the city, and they are the city, right? Buildings don't make city. Policies don't make city. The people that are in that city. And when I say they make the city, it's more than like, yeah, there's living, breathing organisms walking around. But the identity of a city is a self-fulfilling prophecy, just as it is for an individual. It is so critical. The heritage, the mythology, the traditions that make a community what it is. Austin, you're freaking weird. You're freaking weird. To your son's point, you could probably go out to Big Zilker and find the truth on any given day down there. And the same is true with a community's perspective on health and wellness. It's a self-fulfilling. If they believe they're in a food desert, food swamp, yeah, they might be, but it's going to be hard to move them off the dime to make them healthier. So I think that the biggest opportunity is taking old cities where the people actually are, bringing together a movement, a catalyst, jet fuel in the way of design, jet fuel in the way of leadership, jet fuel in the way of economic incentives, and then give people a story that they can say, this is us. This is us. This is who we are. Atomic Habits, great book out there, says if you want to become a runner, don't say I'm going to do a 5K. Instead, say I'm a runner now, and every day I run. And you have much better sustainability than if you just put it on hang your hat on one event. Going all the way back to the oldest of old communities of the blue zones around the world, they don't have smart design. They don't have bio-readers on the street or wayfinding on the street. They have best practice from our species on how these communities organically sprout up. They don't have a Whole Foods or a CVS or a Walgreens in it. Instead, they were built for humans from the get-go. And so I think there's a strong lesson that we don't need to stray too far away from original human-centered design to get an incredible outsized effect that we can still do right here in American communities.
Thank you. I think, the answer is both paths here. So I want to kind of conclude with a closing question for our panelists. I want to leave some time. We'll answer our last question in about 4 minutes and leave about 10 minutes for questions. So please, engage with us. So I want to ask each of you for your big, bold, hairy, audacious idea to move this forward. I think a lot of times we get stuck in details, but we need a bright vision for everybody to take away, from us. So Mark, can you share a big, bold idea around creating inclusive and thriving communities?
Well, I'm still stuck on what Upali and Danny talked about earlier around universities. So I'm going to give a higher ed idea. I walked over to the UT campus the other day where there's a project called the Tower Fellows, where a small number of people, maybe 10 to 15 in their 50s, 60s, 70s, go back to school for a year and pay an extraordinary amount of money to do that. And this is similar to programs that are at Stanford, Harvard, Notre Dame, University of Chicago. I'm actually starting one for Yale that's going to open in January of 25, the Experienced Leaders Initiative, or the Yale Eli Fellows. But these ideas are really small. They're for a handful of people. How could we transform higher education and make it the shining city on the hill for our age-diverse society? And so here's my crazy idea. Why don't we make an early year of Social Security available to people in their 50s and 60s in return for working an actuarially adjusted period later before they get their benefits to be used for education? It would be like a GI Bill for older people. And just as the GI Bill transformed universities through this influx of veterans, this would age integrate the American university. And I think that would have enormous benefits, including for young people at these schools. How do you know how to grow old gracefully when you don't have any contact with anybody but your peers, right? So that's my crazy idea. I did a paper with Deb Whitman, the head of public policy at the AARP, and folks at the Urban Institute on this idea. Let's just say it has not received a groundswell of support, but I'm still out there flogging it. So that's my idea.
Here's your support, Mark.
Yeah.
You have it right here.
So we need to support that idea in this room. Upali, what's your big, bold idea for reimagining urban landscapes?
Oof. I think this idea of enriched environments that we didn't talk about before, but there is incredible research that shows that environments that support physical, social, sensory, and cognitive stimuli. Physical, social, sensory, and cognitive stimuli. Music is a great example of cognitive stimuli, for example, can actually create new synapses in the brain. They can create neurogenesis. So my big, bold idea is a really small idea on let's demand enriched environments. Let's refuse to live in places that are not enriched. Let's refuse to endorse environments that are planned that are not enriched. And let's create a voice as a community, because cities are fundamentally open systems that are built ground up, even if they are endorsed top-down. And so if we as a community demand enrichment from our environments, then that will shift the fabric of our lives and the fabric of our cities foundationally.
Hear, hear.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to Dan, and then we have a microphone here in the center. I want to engage with all of you. Dan, you know, Blue Zones is a visionary concept, but we want more. What's your big, bold idea for creating community well-being and healthy behaviors?
I have two. One is actually an idea I was born right here in Austin, conscious capitalism. You guys familiar with John Mackey's conscious capitalism idea? One of the greatest powers for good in improving the human condition has been for-profit endeavors with a conscious. And at Blue Zones, we're a big believer that big government is not the answer. Shocker. I know. Big government's not the answer. When it comes to healthcare and longevity cities, the answer is in Americans coming up with incentives and business models and value propositions, healthcare, real estate, life insurance, food, that reward or that give people the opportunity to make the healthy choice, the delicious choice, the happy choice, the rewarding choice, and then the loyalty. So consumerism. The idea is take it out of big government, consumerism. My second big idea is beans.
Yep.
Beans, dude. So everybody's like, it's so expensive to eat healthy. It's so expensive. It's so, white privilege to eat healthy. And it is in America. Everybody can't afford to go to Whole Foods or Whole Paycheck. But for most of human history, you know what healthy food was called? Peasant food. It's what the peasants ate. And so beans are super cheap. You can go to Costco, buy a 40-pound bag of dried beans for like $20, lasts you forever, and you can cook it a million different ways and make it delicious. And so the other big idea is let's bring beans back for all Americans. Thank you.
Bring beans back. I love it. That's the political slogan.
Yes.
So thank you. We'd love to engage. As folks have questions, please.
Great. Hi, I'm Lee Goldstein with Volunteers of America. My question is, we have a significant housing crisis in this country. We have many, many older Americans that are actually overhoused in single-family homes, meaning they have a 4-bedroom house and they only need 1 bedroom, but they have no economic incentive in this housing climate to sell that house. They can't get anything better for it when the costs are so high. How do we access those bedrooms, provide affordable housing, and create social connections for aging seniors? What types of tools can we help support? Because I think there's a lot of people who would do that if they had the support.
I could jump in and answer that. One of my favorite attempts to do just what you were describing is a project called Nesterly that was started by 2 young MIT city planning grad students to match older people with room to spare and need for some help around the house with grad students and other young people who are in expensive real estate markets like Boston and New York, and to bring them together. And it's been in Boston, in Columbus, I think Seattle is starting. Nestle, there's some other versions of that. And one of the great things about that project is as you burrow further in, what starts out in efficiency, this exchange that makes sense, reduce rent for chores, and ends up in humanity, in the relationships that are formed. And so I think there's huge potential around this idea, and I'm really eager for somebody to scale it. So we have a hard time hearing, I think, on the mic, so I think that was response to your question.
Yeah. And I'll add to that, too, that I fully agree that you need new business models for affordable housing. There's something about the term affordable housing that, again, conjures up these images. The second thing is people who are investing in road infrastructure, please have them invest in housing. Like, there is an investment lag. Like, we've done so much work around dignity in housing, resiliency in housing. It's a design problem. And it doesn't get enough investment because we're not able to make that economic case. But you solve for housing, infill housing at different scales, you solve for mobility, you actually solve for huge economic concerns. It is not purely a societal concern forgiving. I think we have to change the narrative that affordable housing is the most economically resilient thing we can do. And I think that shifts, and that's why these intergenerational models are new business models that can help. So really appreciate the question.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for being here, y'all. I grew up down the street slinging brisket, telling people a brisket a day keeps the doctor away because we had to. It was bad news. And then I went in city planning and learned about Robert Moses tearing through different neighborhoods, including his like sort of redlining and that kind of mentality, tearing through the Black and Latino neighborhood in Austin. It's like, ooh, that's also bad news. And then last one, I went to work in smart cities for Intel, and we had this amazing infrastructure to try to tell the whole world that the solution to this was to make the intersections have lots of silicon, and the cars have lots of silicon, and then they can all talk to each other. And I was like, oh, okay, the theme across this is it's like typically people who look like me kind of trying to do well, but also make a buck, building these kinds of constructions. So I would love to hear, besides writing blue zones, which is amazing, how you guys see this sort of like upstream ideas from non-white America, like make it into the physical constructions of cities, because it seems like those cultures oftentimes do a lot better thinking beyond our rugged individualism. When you don't have a global sales force and high margins.
I have issues with the mic too a little bit, so I think I got the last part of the question really clearly, but I missed a little bit of the context.
It's okay. It's too much context.
The context sounded fascinating, so. But if you want to repeat just the question. Yeah.
Can you guys just hear if I shout?
I think that's better. That's way better.
Oh my God, I'm
Thank
just gonna shout. So my question was like, when you don't have a giant silicon sales force to try to teach cities how to do autonomous vehicles, like how do you get ideas from the rest of the world, like be smarter than the white rugged individualism style thinking? Like how do you get those physically built in the city?
I can start. I'll tell you the Blue Zones model. And by the way, Blue Zones is in 70 American cities doing this work. Over 8 million Americans live in a Blue Zone project community. And our secret is we don't do anything. We empower the local champions. So in each of these communities, there's that secret society of doers behind the screen, the curtain. Sometimes it's the mayor, but often it's grassroots and grass tips. They know the community, they know everybody, they know Jimmy, they know Donna, they know and you give them the playbook, you give them the sizzle, the jet fuel, the measurement, and help them get resources, and then they go do it themselves. And for Blue Zones, that's been a big part of our inside baseball is they make it their own story.
I would agree. I think the answer is in community. In fact, our urban planning team is called Cities and Communities. And you start from the community up. Like fundamentally, and I said that before, cities are ground-up mechanisms. You can create top-down pathways, but they have to be ground up. I think the irony in what you're saying is, again, what I said about parallel narratives in our world right now. There is a narrative that is about the smart cities, that's happening at a global level, about hyperconnectivity. But one of the things that has happened, that has never happened in our evolution before, is connection to people and connection to place were always coincident. Now we don't have that. You can have connection to people in one community and connection to place at a different level. And I think the power with not just minority communities, but communities that are entrenched in geographies, is that they can see that connection between people and place much more powerfully than any smart infrastructure can, right? And that's what we need to tap. So it's communities who have a relationship to place, who can really unpack the true potential of that geography. And we absolutely need to make room for that, and that happens, to Dan's point. You empower the community and you co-design. It's such a simple concept, but you co-design. You don't take on this narrative of designing for someone without them.
I'll just jump in and say, I'm looking at things from this multi-generational lens, there's been a fourfold increase in multi-generational housing in the United States over the last 3 decades, and that's been driven by immigrant communities and communities of color. And I think that really reflects a much broader desire. I think there's a lot of research of people to live in that way. But I think the real power is from the intersection of the top down and the bottom up. And I live in California, where they passed groundbreaking legislation around accessory dwelling units. And all of a sudden, you got my in-laws live in our accessory dwelling unit, and we now have a multi-generational household, which makes a multi-generational neighborhood. So I think actually the model in a lot of ways is coming from the communities you were describing. But we need public policy to meet this inchoate desire on the part of a wide swath of the population.
I think we have 1 minute left. If we can do 30 seconds each for you guys.
Well, all right, I'll ask half of the question that I was thinking of. So in the U.S., can you think of any cities that are particularly beginning to emulate some of these ideas? Just to bring it down to a little bit more of a tangible level.
There's an initiative, the Healthy NYC. During COVID, New York City saw a decrease in life expectancy of 5 years over the course of 2-year pandemic. So they started recently Healthy NYC that is focused on increasing life expectancy, bringing together agencies, communities, businesses across the city with the specific goal to increase life expectancy from 78 to 83 over the next 5-6 years. So, they have a North Star, they have the political will that they're kind of converging around, and so they'll be interesting folks to see in terms of models for other cities.
I work for
university towns. You're starting to see that increase in life expectancy in university towns a lot too.
I work for a large hospitality brand. What are the opportunities in hospitality? I know, Danny, you do retreats, but besides retreats, are there opportunities to help with renovations, as we have a huge development pipeline of hotels, deeply partnered to kind of do it from scratch versus, what's a conference? That's my question.
I think there's a continuum of dosage that you can give to people to improve their well-being. And at the very low end, it's things like experiences, like a retreat. And at the very high end, it's therapeutic programming, design, cohorts to help them with sustained improvement. And so I think retreats, like at Blue Zones, we have Blue Zones retreats, and they're meant to be on-ramps to get people, once they leave the retreat, they have both fellowship and some best practices to take with them to propagate in their lives better practice.
And right now, we have the largest adaptive reuse potential than we've ever had. We have all these buildings that are looking for a new purpose. We have a huge urban infrastructure that is not getting used, and there's a tremendous opportunity to get that hospitality way of thinking, the guest experience way of thinking to life, because health as a narrative has gotten exhausted. And so I think in longevity, hospitality can reframe the narrative about enjoying life. The things we haven't talked about are joy, creativity, wonder. These are things that are foundationally good for us. They let us live longer. There's incredible evidence to support it. And that's what I think hospitality affords, is a quality of life that's worth living longer for. Because why else do we live as long as we do, right?
I want to thank my panel, Dan, Upali, Mark. I want to thank all of you for being here. It's been great. Thank you.